Hello and welcome back to my fifth part of my Elvish writing course, and as promised we'll be looking at the Quenya writing system, as will my cat down here. For those of you that haven't met him, here's Mango. Say hello to everybody on YouTube. Right, unlike the synonymous mode of Balerian that we looked at in the previous lessons, the Quenya mode uses the vowel markings, which are often synonymous with the Quenya. These are called theta markings and are placed above the consonant letters, meaning that the Quenya modes become what is known as theta writing systems. The Balerian mode, by contrast, which doesn't use these markings, aside from the long vowels, are known as the full writing systems. There are modes which use Sindarin as a base language that also use the theta, one example being the Gondor mode, which some of you may know, which leads me on to another point which I've been meaning to raise just before we make a start. Now, what I want to address is what exactly the Elvish writing systems are, or the languages. It's like I say to people when they talk of the One Ring being written in Elvish. It isn't. The ring itself was made in the fires of Mount Doom, not in a province of any Elvish race, and was forged by Sauron, a fallen spirit of the world of Ardar, not an elf. The language written on the ring was that spoken by orcs and men, known as black speech. When that's spoken, it's a very harsh sounding language, and nothing like Elvish. So the purpose of this is just to make it clear that the term Elvish relates to a language. The Quenya, which we're writing with, is an alphabet. So just because something is written in the Quenya doesn't mean it is Elvish. It would be similar to someone looking at some Italian script and calling it English because it used the Latin alphabet. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. It would serve to clear a lot of things up. Anyway, back to the Quenya systems. There are two types of Quenya dialect that we know of, the classic and the general. The classic mode is accepted to be as it was written before the release of The Lord of the Rings. The general mode is what we know to be the Quenya at the point of the release of The Lord of the Rings and subsequently afterwards. As such, there are two different ways of writing Quenya. So depending on which you want to recreate, you'll use either the classic or the general Quenya writing modes. We'll look at the general mode today, being the more modern and the most attested of both of them, meaning that there are more examples known to be written by Tolkien himself. So arguably the more accurate, I suppose. There are also systems which have been developed over the last few years where other readers of Elvish studies have made changes to create a more complete language. As most will know, Tolkien never wrote a complete dictionary in Elvish, and there are many words which simply don't exist. So if you were to ask me to translate a script which would have little bearing on anything remotely Elvish, such as my Space Badger has just completed Tetris on my homeboy's Nintendo, it just wouldn't happen. However, a script such as the winds blow gently through the tall trees, now that would translate well, given that it's more related to the nature of an Elvish lifestyle and consequently the language. However, if you've come across names of either Helga Faustkanger or David Sarlo, you may be aware of what today is known as Neo-Elvish. Between the two of them, they created a more versatile lexicon of both Sindarin and Quenya. They both admit that it's got nothing to do with Tolkien himself, but in fairness, both of them are very well read on the topic, and rather than making words up, they have based the new words on the systems already put in place by Tolkien. David Sarlo was, for those of you that don't know, was the linguist appointed to aid Peter Jackson in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Jackson actually made new lines for the scripts in the film for the elves, which David Sarlo then had to create Elvish words for, hence the Neo-Elvish. Something which, as a consequence, annoyed some readers by Mango, who prefer to follow the original path set by Tolkien. Anyway, we'll make a start. We'll look at the table that you will all be familiar with by now. If you haven't familiarised yourself with the table and have started looking at this video before the rest in the series, I would urge you to start at the beginning to avoid confusion, as I can't cover everything in just this one video. So, we'll begin with the Plosive series, both voiced and unvoiced. You'll notice at this point that the names of the columns have changed. Where we once had dental, labial, palatal and velar, we now have Tinko, Palma, Kalma and Cressa. Now these are the names that were given by Tolkien but are used in exactly the same context. Okay, so we have the following tengwa for the Plosives, all of which will be familiar from the table shown at the end of part 4. Next we have the Fricatives. The first change from the previous table here being the KH, which was previously an H. This is a breathy sound rather than the glottal sound that some may produce at the end of the word loch. The H after the K serves to soften the plosive sound. The only change here, the only other change here is the DH, which again uses the H to soften the plosive. Next we come to the nasals, which are exactly the same as before, and following those we then have the semi-vowels and glides. The only change here being the very last. Here we see the tengwa, which is used as an A vowel when it's placed next to another vowel. The reason for this is simply so that the carrier symbol, which we covered in part 3, is not overused. So for example, if you had an I preceding the A, you may choose to write this symbol following the I instead of using a second carrier. You'll see an example of that come up. Now we come to the additional lettering. General Quenya as we know it currently has 12 additional symbols. The first is another symbol for the R consonant, and at this point you're probably asking, why have we got a second symbol for the R? Now the rule here is that this symbol is used before vowels, thus carrying a vowel marking, whereas the previous symbol is used before consonants or at the end of a word. The next represents an RH phoneme, which, much like the previous KH and DH, the H here serves to soften the sound of the R consonant. The next two are L and the corresponding softened phoneme of LH. Then we have the symbols for S. Again, we've got two symbols here for good reason. The one on the right will be used in place of the one on the left, again when adjacent to a vowel, and thus will be required to carry a teta marking. The next two are explained in exactly the same way, but represent the Z phoneme. Then we have the H, and again another softened phoneme, HW. Incidentally, this can also be used for the reversal of that, the WH, as found at the start of words such as whisper. Finally, we have two further vowel tengwa, the first an I and the second U. Now the rule attached here is the same as the previous A vowel, in that these are to be used to compensate for carrier overuse. Now just a further note on the softening of the consonants, as I've been talking about it quite a lot. The theory behind this is surrounding the weakening of the articulated consonant sound. This is known as lenition. This is commonly used in Welsh, and no doubt will be familiar to any Welsh speakers watching. But for those interested and want to understand a little bit more about it, a simple Google search will explain the roots and the encompassing theory behind this branch of linguistics. Needless to say that Tolkien found this very interesting and found it suitably fitting for his Elvish race to use. Next, we come to consonant modifications. Now, there are a few modifications, and not all are going to be outlined in this video, as they are relevant only to other forms of language, such as modifications for Old English script. So again, if you're interested in the theory attached to other languages such as Old English, please post a message. I'll be happy to send further information. So the first we have is the doubling consonant marking, which appears as a wavy line, or a tilde as known, underneath the tengwa to be doubled. So here are some examples of that. Next we have the nasalized consonant modification, which also uses the tilde marking, except this is placed above the tengwa instead of below. The modification is applied to a nasal following a consonant, such as nt, as found in the word don't. Now, there is a further rule which applies here that states that the following consonant must be of the same series as the adjacent nasal. So nt is permitted, as they are both part of the tinko, or the teeth series. Another example would be mp, as in the word damp, being both from the labial or palmar series. So here are some examples of those. The final two modifications are known as the following modifications, which apply to both the W and the S. The following W modification will occur when the W follows a consonant, and in this case the relevant theta is placed over the preceding consonant. It is not known whether this applies in all cases, as not all, as they are found in English, would have been represented in Tolkien's notes. However, those that we do know include GW, DW and TW. Examples of those are now shown. Now, the following S modification is more of an aesthetic one. That is to say, Tolkien liked the look of it, and may have disregarded its linguistic significance in the favour of it looking pretty, and would apply to an S following a consonant. This is shown as an embellishment extending from the bow of the preceding consonant, and again, we cannot be sure how far this rule extends, but examples that we know of include TS and KS. There's more information regarding these rules in the journals which circulate on these subjects, but if I were to include all of this information in my videos, I feel that I'd lose a lot of interest. But I trust you all have sufficient information to recreate scripts of your own. But should you be writing a script for a tattoo or jewellery or anything of lasting value, I'd urge you to seek further advice before doing anything. In such circumstances, I'll be more than happy to help, so drop me a message and I'll do everything I can. Now we come to the vowels, which a lot of you have been asking about, as they appear as these pretty little markings that we've been speaking about in this video. The basic vowel markings will be exactly the same as they were for the long vowel markings in the Beleriand mode, but to refresh your memory, I will show them once again here. However, you will see the addition of the Y in this case that doesn't appear in the Beleriand mode. So here's your slide. Okay, now the next part is very important, so I want to make sure that this is explained in the clearest possible way. As the vowels are written as markings above the consonant symbols, you may be asking whether the vowels are written before or after the consonant. That is to say, given my name, Matt, M-A-T-T, would the marking for the A be written over the M or the T? The answer is either. So it is permitted to write the vowels above the preceding consonant, in this case the M in my name, or the following consonant, the T. But whichever way you choose, you must stick to this rule for the rest of the script. Now, let's take the word tengwa. If we decide to write the vowels over the following consonant, the E would be fine written above NG. But what happens when we get as far as the A? Here we would use the carrier symbol, which represents a null consonant value and only serves to carry the vowel. The carrier symbol itself has no consonant value at all. Now we come to the long vowels, which are explained in the previous videos. So again, if you're unsure of the definition and you haven't already done so, please look at the previous lessons. Long vowels use the same markings as the short vowels we've just spoken of, but use a long carrier, as was the case for the Blerian mode. Now, we've seen samples of Tolkien's notes where the marking has also been doubled above the long carrier, along with the vowel tengwa that we've seen in the previous table also carrying the teta marking. So we end up with three ways in which we can write the long vowel. So for an example, we'll use the long A vowel. The first being the standard long carrier with the single A teta marking above it. The second, also the carrier but with a double teta marking. And the third being the previously mentioned A tengwa with the A teta marking above it. Finally, we have the diphthongs, and again, if you're unaware of the purpose of these, please again look at my previous videos which will explain. Now, the diphthongs make use of the vowel tengwa, as we've seen before, which represents the second vowel in the diphthong, and place the first vowel as a teta above this. Now, those that we know of in this mode include AI, AU, EI, and UI, which you'll have seen in the slide. Okay, so this concludes the general Quenya mode. I hope that it all makes sense. It's not an easy one to explain, but as I always say, if I can explain anything further, please drop me a note and I'll do my best to explain further. Okay, my next video, being halfway through this series, will be a Q&A where I'll invite all of you to ask any questions that you'd like answering or feel others may benefit from. Obviously my time is limited on these videos, so it'll be a case that the earlier questions will get a response. I'll give you all time to think and post some questions, and I'll look forward to anything that may be written. I will put that video up in the next couple of weeks or so, depending on how many people post questions. But in the meantime, thank you all again for your support. I always appreciate your comments, your thoughts and your questions. So please continue to write, and I will always respond as soon as my hectic life permits. Okay, I'll see you all again soon. Cheers.